Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Software Plaza podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Software Plaza, and I bring you each week a different conversation from a different vendor or someone who's building something in the space of cloud native computing, Kubernetes, DevOps. That's what we're really focused on. And if you like what you hear in this conversation, go check out more like this that we've done over the past few years. You can find us at softwareplaza.com or wherever you listen to your podcast, just search for Software Plaza podcast and you'll find us there. With that, I'd like to welcome today's guest. It's Filip Verloy, and he is the CTO of EMEA and APJ. That's regions, and he's CTO of Rubrik X, which is a division within Rubrik, the company. So, yeah, he's been on the show in the past, probably about a year or two ago. I'm not sure, and yeah, it's great to have him back. And he sounds excited about things he's working on at Rubrik X. So I thought, it'd be great to hear what they're building and what they're solving for. So yeah, Philip, it's great to have you back. Welcome back to the show.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me back. I'm indeed excited to talk about what we've been doing. So good timing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, what is Rubrik X? What do you guys focus on within Rubrik X?
Yeah, so Rubrik X is sort of the incubation lab, if you will, within the larger Rubrik organization. So Rubrik, the company, has been around for 12 years now. We've gone IPO a few years ago, like publicly listed company. We've become quite a large organization working with many, many enterprise and public companies. So the idea of the incubation lab, Rubrik X, is really how do we take some of these new, smaller, innovative ideas, and how do we figure out go-to-market success for them, right? So we obviously, are working with customers on a day-to-day basis. We do not want to distract the larger Rubrik organization with every new idea that we have. So that's why we have this separate team, if you will, a team of dedicated pre-sales, sales, engineering PMs that look for those new, innovative ideas, sometimes built internally, sometimes part of M&A activity. Like we've acquired a bunch of companies over the years as well that we've integrated into the larger stack. And how do we then scale those new technologies towards the broader team? So that's really what the Rubrik X team is focused on.
All right, interesting. Sounds like it will be quite, adventurous and quite, things keep changing probably if it's an incubation lab because it's all about bringing something new to the market. And
Yeah, 100%. And it's like a startup within a startup, and because it's incubation, like not every idea is a winner, right? So it's some of these ideas go back into the box, in a manner of speaking. So that's also what's exciting about it, is like figuring out, where is the market going, where are our customers going, what would be beneficial 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and then making some bets about that. And not all bets are winners, of course, but yeah, that's what keeps it exciting for sure.
yeah, yeah. So what have you guys been up to at Rubrik X, and what are the exciting things that you're working on? What excites you the most? And we're going to be obviously talking about some of that. But give us an intro and a teaser into what's exciting at Rubrik X.
Yeah, so what we are currently focused on the most is sort of two main topics. So the larger Rubrik platform is all about cyber resilience. So we've done cyber resilience for data. That's what we've historically been known for. And in the last couple of years, we've also added resilience for identity. So the identity piece is something that Rubrik X is now also heavily involved with, because we keep adding new components to the platform, things that weren't really, possible before with traditional identity backup and recovery tools. So how do we actually make those environments resilient? So think of things like if your uh, entire identity environment is breached on the back of a cyber event, how do you do like a clean recovery so your business is operational as quickly as possible without any threat of reinfection and so on. So that's one piece. And the other piece is how do we build resilience for AI agents? So AI agents are, of course, the talk of the town. They're everywhere now. Everybody's, at least thinking about agents. Some customers or organizations are experimenting with it. Others have definitely already put some agentic workflows and agents into production and are figuring out how to scale it across the enterprise. So there we've come up with a new addition to the Rubrik family, which is called Rubrik Agent Cloud. And that's all about, agentic operations. How do we help customers take this idea of a prototype AI agent that's maybe limited in what it can do, and how do we securely scale it so it can actually become as powerful as you'd hoped it to be, but without the without the danger of it going off the rails too much and deciding to do some unexpected things in the environment. So that's really the goal.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, I see that Rubrik Agent Cloud is listed right on your homepage, the Rubrik homepage, and the tagline reads, "Control your agents with AI by monitoring, governing, and remediating agentic actions on one platform." And I guess, yeah, that would make a great topic for our conversation today. And you mentioned you're trying to balance both sides, scale as well as reducing risk with agents using Rubrik Agent Cloud. Tell us a bit more about that. Um, do you focus on being like a platform to run agentic workloads? So in that sense, your focus may be skewing towards more scale and performance, or do you see yourself as a platform that is primarily focused on, securing, reducing risk, and while maybe you could integrate with other platforms that maybe your customers prefer to run their agents on, which side of the spectrum do you lean more towards?
Yeah, no, excellent question. So a couple of things to unpack for sure. So what you mentioned, like first on like the tagline on the website is like we are trying to like manage AI with AI, which I think is a very exciting thing that I'll definitely touch upon a bit later as well, which is like how can we use a small language model as a judge to sort of steer and govern AI agents in an environment. So that's definitely one of the innovative things that we've been working on. But to your broader question is the focus is really on securing and providing an operational platform for customers. So they'll run their agents, they'll build their agents on the tooling that they're used to or that they prefer, right? So this might be things like a Microsoft Copilot Studio, an AWS Bedrock Core, or N8N, which is very popular in Europe where I'm based, Google Vertex AI, whatever customers prefer as an agentic platform. That's what they'll keep building on. That's also where like integrations live with all of their existing tools and data sets. So that's what makes it really easy for a customer. And then what we are focused on really is, okay, you have this agent. How do you now make sure that you can securely operationalize the agent? So when we say scale, it's also how do you scale it into production? Like how do you take it from a small pilot to a large scale deployment in an environment? There's a little bit of overlap between the two, not to get too deep into the weeds, but part of Rubrik Agent Cloud is based on an acquisition that we did in June of 25 of a company called Predibase out of San Francisco. And they were really focused on fine-tuning large language models. So turning them into like smaller language models, which were dedicatedly trained on like data from the customer. So they become, more cost effective to operationalize. Instead of running a big foundation model, you can run like a smaller model, which is dedicated to your intellectual property. It's trained on your data and so on. But then also take those smaller language models and like run many of them on like a single GPU. So, and additionally increasing cost effectiveness, essentially. And then also doing things like predictive decoding and so on to make it even more cost effective. But we've taken that core technology, and that's what we're using to run our LLM-as-a-judge in Rubrik Agent Cloud. So it's not that we are hosting models or beyond the SLM-as-a-judge. So everything remains as is for the customer. They build on the platform that they're used to building on. And then we are then focused solely on like security operations, safeguards of those agents.
Yeah. I think it's interesting you mentioned about optimizing for GPU usage, because I think that's one of the big focus areas right now with AI, which is hardware, the hardware layer. There's, GPUs are scarce, they're expensive, and managing them is really important now if you want to do anything at scale with AI. So I think that's quite a cool feature that's part of Rubrik Agent Cloud. Talking about security and risks, could you outline for us some of the key risks related to Agentic AI, some of the new ones and the top ones that you come across most frequently?
Yeah, sure. So there's plenty of examples in like the popular press, of course. Like it captures people's imagination, right? If this AI agent, this autonomous system, does some unexpected things and sort of goes off the rails. So there's almost on a daily basis there's more examples of agents making mistakes. Like fairly recently we had this whole OpenClaw debacle where I think it's a safety researcher at Meta ran OpenClaw and then figured out that at a certain point it started to delete all of the emails out of her inbox to optimize space, and then she couldn't get it to stop via the WhatsApp interface she was using to interface with it. So she had to like run towards her Mac Mini to turn it off. And then the other example that we see used quite a lot is this startup that was sort of vibe coding a new environment and had all of their customer data in a database. And then during a supposed code freeze, the agent went ahead and decided to delete that database. So effectively, their entire application was down. And now there's some things happening with on the AWS side, like some things with Keto AI and so on, like maybe being responsible for some downtime, even though AWS is sort of disputing that at the moment. So there's many of these examples out in the public of agents sort of going off the rails. So there's definitely that as a risk. But more broadly, if you sort of take a step back, like an agent ultimately uses a brain, right, to reason about the question that you've asked it, like the task that you give the agent is reasoned upon by this LLM, right? And this LLM is a probabilistic construct, like it will, come up with an answer or come up with an idea, or in the case of an agent, come up with a plan or an approach that it thinks is the right approach to, answer your question or perform the task that you've given it. But you can't really upfront, of course, predict what that plan will look like, which tools that the agent is going to interface with, how it's going to go about that entire workflow end to end. So there's an inherent risk in the fact that an agent is in itself also probabilistic. You can't really predict what it's going to do. So a lot of people try to build like individual guardrails around those agents, because maybe the agent is interacting with, PII data or like intellectual property in your environment. Maybe the agent has access to tools, and those tools can be, modify or delete tools in your environment. Like maybe they decide to change the configuration of your Kubernetes cluster because you've asked it to optimize for cost or something like that, right? So there's many things that these agents can decide to do based on the interpretation of your task that you've given it, which might not be ultimately what you were aiming for. So there's definitely that risk that we need to manage. So we have an agent we want the agent to be useful. For the agent to be useful, it needs to be connected to your production systems, to your production data and your production tools. So that opens up a new attack surface, right? So the agent is this, autonomous system running around in your environment, making these decisions, and you are, you need to figure out a way to control that agent. So making sure that you have visibility over that agent. Everybody knows about shadow IT. We now have shadow AI, right? So everybody's sort of experimenting with AI. They're experimenting with AI agents as well. It's become extremely easy to start building agents, not only using tools like Copilot Studio, but for example, if you're just using M365, there's now something like agent mode within Excel. That's sort of like autonomous workflows almost. So these things will show up left and right. It's going to be hard to not allow it, and it's going to be hard to control it. So the idea then is, if we assume these agents are here, and if we assume they need to interact with our corporate data, how do we apply governance on top of those agents so we can more tightly control centrally what these agents are allowed to do and not allowed to do? And we have some very specific technology based on like the Predibase acquisition, but also based on some internal innovation that we feel will allow us to steer those agents in the right direction so they are like useful. Like the idea is unleash agents, because that's where a lot of the promise of these agents is there, but without any of the risk, right? Without any of the perils of those agents. That's the goal.
Interesting. Yeah, some interesting points you mentioned there about just having guardrails so that agents don't have a free rein to delete data or do things you don't want them doing. And just the issue of shadow AI, and that creating agents is becoming so easy now, and so it's proliferating, and that you need governance. What is the right approach to take with securing? And you obviously also touched on this in your response just now, the right approach to take towards AI and governance. But just to dig in a little more on that on that idea, just I'm wondering, how do people think of this? Do we think of setting up guardrails so that we give agents specific directions and or policies, use policies that govern what they can and cannot do, or some way that we work with the agents? Or do we, instead of working with the agents, we work with like the security teams, the other teams that are working with agents and interacting with them, and who may be creating some of these agents? Do we work with them to enforce policies through them over the agents? What is the approach, or is it something else completely different?
No, I think you're on the right track of what we typically see, at least. So the idea would be, let's say you have somebody who's responsible for coming up with the concept of like, why are we building the agent in the first place? Like, what is the desired outcome for the business? And then maybe some of these agents are built within business units itself, like almost citizen developers, where you make it so easy to build an agent that they're building agents for very specific use cases. And then in that agent framework or in that agent scaffolding, that's where typically a set of instructions live, right? So, and in those instructions, you sort of tell the agent, this is what I expect of you. Like, this is the guidelines that you're supposed to sort of follow. You give it access to a certain set of tools. Now, those set of tools may be small, they may be large, like maybe you're building multiple agents for a single workflow where you have like an orchestrator agent or a governing agent that uses smaller agents, and each of those agents only has a few tools. So at least they can't hallucinate too much about which tools to use and how to use those tools. So there's various things that can be controlled there. But let's assume you're just building an agent. You give the agent some local instructions that sort of define, this is how I want you to operate, and these are the tools that you have access to. What we are then typically seeing with larger customers is they have an AI governance committee, or maybe it's just an AI center of excellence that sort of partly takes up that role as well. And then what the AI governance committee typically does is, okay, we maybe are like a North American-based company, a European company, an APAC company. There's a certain set of regulations we need to take into account. Like maybe it's ISO 42001, maybe it's the EU AI Act, right? There's certain general frameworks or guardrails that you need to work with, but then there's the local governance rules that you want to apply as a company, like where you say, we as a, I don't know, a manufacturing company in Central Europe, we don't want the agent to be able to interact with customer PII data directly, or they're allowed to read data, but they're not allowed to use that PII data in a response back to an external customer, things like that. So those type of guardrails. The thing is then, how do you take this framework from the AI governance committee and how do you implement that as actual technical guardrails that control the agents? So the approach that we are taking, and I've mentioned the LLM as a judge before. So we have this SLM that we use, that's part of our policy system. So you come up with a set of policies. It could even be that guardrail document that you've fed into us from the governance committee or the center of excellence that we then use in plain English as natural language, translates into policies that the SLM judge will use to interpret the behavior of the agent. So let's say you've built an agent on Copilot Studio. That agent, you ask the agent to perform a task. The agent talks to an MCP server, calls an API, whatever it wants to do to perform that task. The SLM judge will see that workflow and it will decide, is this allowable in the context of what you've given us in that set of policies? And if it's not allowed based on that policy framework, we'll block that tool call. So the agent can't actually perform that operation, and it will need to go back, re-reason again. Okay, what else can I do to perform this task? Or maybe it just stops at that point. So we have this idea of, we deploy it as an AI gateway, or we have direct API integration with a number of platforms. But this AI gateway sits in between the agent, the LLM, and the tools. And the gateway is where the policies that the SLM judge decides upon are implemented. So that gateway will then decide, this is allowable behavior for that agent in this environment, yes or no. I'm either going to create a bunch of alerts for it, or I'm going to actively block the agent from making this mistake. And if it was just alerts because it was in monitoring mode, if the agent does go ahead and say delete some data, we have a way to rewind that mistake as well, ultimately. So at a super high level, think of it as an AI gateway policy enforcement point. The policy is judged upon by this LLM as a judge, this external third party, this independent party, right? So independent of what the developers instructed the agents to do, you still have this independent judge, and this independent judge can be controlled by, maybe it's the AI team, maybe it's the governance team, maybe it's the security team. So that judge sits there and will always make sure that you're following the principles that were set upon it by your central governance committee or center of excellence. So that's what makes it powerful, in the sense that you don't have to then go back to each agent if, for example, regulations change over time. Like, I happen to be based in Belgium, close to Brussels. Like, every day there's new regulation thrust upon us. So if things change, how do you instruct all of those agents to now adhere to that new regulatory policy? Well, if you have the judge that will steer the agents in the right way, that would be an easy way to centrally control and manage them.
Yeah, great way to explain that, the concept of a gateway. Makes me think though, do you ever see instances of where there are conflicting policies? Maybe one team sets one policy, another team sets another policy, and there's a conflict at some point. How do you resolve that? Have you seen, is that an issue at all that comes up, or typically you've seen organizations being more planned about their frameworks?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So usually what happens is you come up with an initial set of instructions when you're building the agent, and then we'll implement monitoring based on that set. And then if we see the agent change its behavior over time, and that sometimes happens when, for example, you go from OpenAI 5.1 to OpenAI 5.4, and all of a sudden you have a new, more capable LLM that decides to interpret that intent of the end user in a slightly different way, and maybe try to use the tool with a different set of parameters that now does cause potential problems in the environment. So that's where the instructions deviate, which is totally fine, because the the judge piece will then say, well, based on the latest instructions centrally, this is how we're going to steer that agent. And then obviously you have then the ability to, through that monitoring system, go back to the agent and say, actually, we need to rethink our initial framework here, because we are now confronted with a new reality, right? And we have to change how we thought the agent should operate. So I think it's totally fine for those systems to be in conflict with each other. I think that's where a lot of the power exists, really, to like take this interpretation, which we feel is a misinterpretation in that particular point in time, and then make sure it doesn't cause a problem in the environment.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good approach. So coming to this idea of identity resilience that Rubrik is known for, how do we apply it to this world of AI agents? Do we see agents themselves as identities, and there are other like the traditional identities like humans, and then there are the agents, which are the newer types of identities? Is that how we see the world of like identities changing with AI? And what does identity resilience actually mean, given now that AI agent workloads are really, taking off and becoming really popular?
Yeah, like identity is a whole big set of issues, a big can of worms in the world of agentic AI, for sure. And the reason I say that is there's multiple things happening at the same time, right? So consider even a very simple agent where you have a user calling an agent. That agent uses an LLM. The LLM then decides, I need these tools and I need access to this data to perform the task that it asked. The agent
Mhm.
then reaches out to the MCP server, an API directly, a local file system, however you've configured it. Now try to trace back what was the original calling identity that set out to perform that task. The agent interpreted it. Then probably, let's assume you're using something like OAuth. The agent reaches out to the MCP server. The MCP server probably says, like, 401 denied. You don't have an access token for this. Go request access to the user. The user gets a list of permissions, like a set of scopes that it needs to approve for that particular task. The user does that. The agent performs its task. And the next time the agent does a task, maybe it needs another set of permissions, a broader scope or a smaller scope. And throw in like some hard-coded API keys in the middle there as well. So it's kind of hard to figure out, like, how does this all fit together from an identity perspective. So first thing that we always recommend is, like, get your identity house in order. And that's why we
Mhm.
have this identity resilience approach, is for human identities and non-human identities. And agents go way beyond just non-human identities, I would say. But let's say human and non-human identities. The idea is you need to build a resilient identity infrastructure, meaning you need to understand, like, what's happening with your identities, who are leveraging your identities, in which way, what identities have access to what data, is there over permissioning there. So once you have an understanding of that, you can understand, like, if the agent is using those non-human identities, those sets of permissions, etc., at least you have a way to understand, well, what does that mean in terms of my exposure, for example, on my data side. And then if something happens with the identity, how can we make that identity resilient? So let's say your entire IDP is down. due to a cyber event or something. Like, how do we rebuild your entire identity infrastructure from scratch without you losing too much time? So, like, automating that process of protecting your identity infrastructure, rebuilding it in an automated way, and then also making sure that we have an understanding of all of the changes that are happening in the identity environment. Some of these changes not even related to agents. Some of these changes might be malicious, like somebody trying to build persistence in your identity environment. So those things you need to understand so you can undo them and make sure that you can continue to operate in a safer way. So there's definitely overlap between agent resilience and identity resilience. But I think our first recommendation would always be make sure you have your identity and also your data side of the equation in order before you try to add an agentic layer on top of that. That's going to be hard to unwind if you do it the other way around, I think.
Wow, interesting. And in a bit, in a few minutes, I was wondering if you could show us like a demo of some of these things that Rubrik Agent Cloud can do, some of these capabilities. But before that, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question to what you just mentioned about getting your identity house in order. Is this how do organizations do this? Is this something they meet together in a room and they sit and hash out like a framework and like a set of a design doc or principles that govern their identities? Is this something that Rubrik helps with? Is it part of the product? How do people go about doing this?
Yeah, no, very good point. So historically, Rubrik has been focused on the recovery side of identity. So what we've been doing for a number of years is we've been able to like safeguard your identity infrastructure. And like technically what I mean by that is take a backup of your identity provider, store it on an immutable format so it can't be destroyed by a malicious actor or ransomware or anything like that. So give you a path back to recovery. That's what we've been historically been doing. Now, the other side is of getting your identity house in order is understanding your exposure. So there's what we call indicators of exposure, meaning there is best practices when you think about identity, and those best practices exist, across Active Directory, across Entra, across Okta, across whatever platform that you're using. There's a certain way or a certain set of principles that you should adhere to set up your identity, so your identity attack surface is as minimal as possible. And those exist in our terminology as IOEs, indicators of exposure. So, for example, how many privileged accounts do you have in your environment? How is MFA set up for your VIP accounts? What is the amount of data that a user has access to as part of its group permissions? So things like that you can use to understand what is the current landscape that I'm operating in, like what's my current risk in terms of identity exposure. And if I implement best practices, how can I shrink that risk as much as possible? So that's one way to look at that. The second thing, which is important, is if you think about all of these preventative tooling, like detection tools that are out there, think about Microsoft Defender for Identity or like a CrowdStrike identity protection, or like any of those tools that sort of monitor for potential malicious behavior in the environment that might be an indication of potential compromise. What if we can take those signals and combine those signals with what we understand of the changes in the identity that happen on a continuous basis? Because remember, we're taking a backup at least once a day, so we know exactly like what is changing over time. So what if we take the signal from those external threat detection systems, combine it with the changes that potential malicious actor has made, and then allow you to undo those changes in the identity environment, basically kicking out that malicious actor. So you start from a clean environment that you can then use to continue to operate. So that's really part of the identity resilience piece, is making sure they're implementing best practices to shrink the identity attack surface as much as possible, have an immutable copy for if things really go wrong. But if your external threat signals indicate that something is happening with your environment, also have a very surgical way to undo only those changes in your identity system. So there's a combination of these things that we do to sort of safeguard and build resilience for identity specifically.
Right. All right. Wow. Demo time. I was wondering if you could show us some of this in action and see what Rubrik Agent Cloud can actually do.
Yeah. I think you should see my screen.
Yep.
So basically, what I'll quickly show is, let's start from the end user perspective, right? So let's assume I'm a user. Maybe I'm internal to an environment. Maybe I'm an external user. Doesn't really matter. I have a couple of agents that we are running here on my environment. So we have this customer support agent that's meant to deal with like customer inquiries when people like ask for what's the status of my order, et cetera, et cetera. So I have this agent, and this agent is in this case connected to GPT-5 as an LLM. And as you can see, the agent is directly talking to the LLM. So in this case, there's no Rubrik Agent Cloud in the middle. And then to make things a bit easier for ourselves, we have a set of predefined prompts, but essentially, of course, I can ask it to do anything. So if I ask it a benign question like, okay, can you check the status of my order? The agent is going to figure out what's the tool that I need to show this particular customer all of the information about its order. So it's saying, yeah, this is your order. It's been shipped, yada, yada, yada. This is the tool that I used to understand that. All good. But let's now say the person using the agent has malicious intent, or it could even be accidental. But let's say it's malicious intent, whereby I'm going to ask the agent to clean up all orders older than a week, supposedly to free up space in the database. So now the agent is, reasoning, how can I do this? What tools do I need to use for this? What database do I need to talk to? And then you can see it went ahead and deleted 45,000 records. It freed up 2.3 gigabytes. It's even saying production data was affected. So that is in the assumption now that's not something that we want the customer support agent to be able to do. Like this has impact on the entire infrastructure because it's like the centralized Salesforce database, let's say. So what I can do now is I'm going to say, well, instead of the agent talking directly to the LLM, I'm going to route the traffic to the Rubrik gateway. And on the Rubrik gateway, we have implemented a set of policies. So I'll show you how that works in a second, but let's assume same customer support agent, same LLM, and I'm going to ask it the same question again, right? So I'm going to say, clean up all orders older than 7 days to free up space. It's going to do its reasoning again, try to call the tool. And in this case, you can see that it's actually trying to use the clean up old data tool, but in this case, it's blocked by Agent Cloud because our judge has now said, this is not what I expected this agent to do. So there's intent in the agent scaffolding that the person creating the agent has created, but clearly somebody has figured out through prompting or whatever to make the agent do something that was not intended. And now we have this additional policy enforcement point, which is the gateway to control that. So the way that works is we have this system. We can connect this system to all of these agentic platforms. One way to do it would be a gateway where we offer the end-to-end solution, basically. We also have plugins for popular gateways. If you already have a gateway like Light LLM or something like that, that's possible. Or we can connect directly to cloud platforms via an API. Or we can even detect endpoint agents using like mobile device management tools. So if you have like a workstation agentic system, like a cloud cowork, for example, that you want to control, that's also possible. So in this case, the agent traffic is flowing through our gateway, which allows us to inventory all of those agents, including that customer support agent, and we'll assign it with like a risk scoring. So the idea is that not only do we understand the agents, we understand the tools that those agents are interacting with, and more importantly, what capabilities those tools have. Like, is it read capabilities, planning capabilities against Google Calendar? That seems pretty benign. Or is it actually like delete capabilities against Salesforce, which is that clean up old data tool that was just called? And as you can see, we just generated an active violation against that because we tried to call it and we blocked it in this case. So how do you block it essentially, right? So you have all of these agents performing all of these tasks in the environment. So that's where the SLM-judge comes into play. So the idea is you spin this up out of the box. There's a couple of built-in policies that say things like read-only tools or only whitelisted tools, et cetera, et cetera. But if I create a policy, I can say something like agent is not allowed to provide financial advice. Just as an example, we'll take this very brief, like English language statement, we'll validate it using our SLM, and we'll see if we can build a policy based on this. So there's a policy strength indication that you're getting. So it's a very broad statement, of course. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to help you to expand it in a way where it is very specific and applicable to your specific use case. So what I mean by that is if I say not allowed to provide financial advice, do I mean trading stocks or do I mean explaining what the tax code of the UK is, for example, right? So those are two different use cases that you might want to allow the tax code example and not allow the trading example. So that's what we're sort of asking for you to specifically define. But even with that, even like moderately strength policy, if I do something like, what if the agent comes back with, I recommend buying 100 shares of NVIDIA as an example. So now our judge is going to say, well, if this is the response coming back from the agent, that's in violation with that policy that you've just given me. And I actually have a high level of confidence that it isn't in violation. And this is why. So once you've built this out, and it doesn't have to be like this, right? It could be just give us a policy document with all of your policies. We'll build these rules on top of that. And then once you're happy with the policy, you can implement it either as a monitoring policy or as a blocking policy, right? And if it's a blocking policy, if I go to my alerts here, you can see that we've blocked these operations. And then you can see exactly like what agent, in this case, the customer provisioning agent, called which tool, which policy did it violate, what did we enforce from a Rubrik perspective, and what does the exact timeline of that agent look like, including like, which arguments did it make and so on. So that's a way for us to centrally control what are the agents allowed to do and not to do. So it's visibility of the agents, visibility of the tools, but also if I open up each agent, you get this nice graph of what is the agent doing, which applications is the agent interfacing with, what tools is it using against the application, and which particular actions is it performing that might be in violation with the policy that I've set. And oh, by the way, what identity is this session using to perform this task? So that's what we're trying to bring together in Agent Cloud, in this case, to like super tightly control what the agents are allowed to do and not to do. And I think the big unlock is this natural language policy builder, because you're never going to be able to come up with a set of deterministic rules up front to control your agents, right? Because you have this LLM brain, this probabilistic brain that the agent uses that you can't really predict. So that's why you need that same capability as the control point, because the agent might decide to do something or try something new tomorrow, and that's why you need to judge that decision at that particular point in time. In this case, using the SLM, which is then based on the acquisition of Predibase, like a fine-tuned SLM running specifically for your environment in a very cost-effective manner as well.
Wow, thanks. That was quite an interesting demo there with a lot of the capabilities that you really showed very clearly and exactly how they function. I was wondering also if you wanted to comment a bit on the recovery capabilities, because what we just saw was the prevention capabilities, but you also mentioned that even recovery is possible even after, let's say, a breach or an attack. Anything on those lines?
Yeah, so let's assume it's an agent, and let's assume we had a policy in place, or maybe we didn't even have a policy in place. But if we had a policy in place, it was a monitoring policy. So it said, okay, the agent did something wrong, but we didn't actually block it because the policy was not set up that way. So for example, here I have this agent called Cloud File Manager. It's interacting with SharePoint in this case, and it has access to two tools, like the search tool and the delete tool. And what we've seen here is that it decided to call the delete tool in OneDrive at a certain point in time, which went against one of the policies that we've set up. So if I go to that action, I can see that it was in monitoring mode, so it wasn't blocked. If you go to the timeline, you can sort of see what happened is that the agent first performed a search in OneDrive looking for, in this case, Azure secrets. So the agent that we have is set up to look for things like static API keys in OneDrive and then mask or delete just those keys. But what we've seen it do here is if I scroll down, is it actually deleted a file. So instead of masking the data, it went ahead and deleted the entire file, which wasn't the intent of the person who built the agent. So what can we do in this case is, because in the broader construct of using Rubrik in this environment, the SharePoint and OneDrive data happens to be protected by Rubrik, then we have this remediate button here. And in the remediate button, I have this rewind action. So what happens is we'll indicate this is the data that was modified or deleted by this particular action. So all of these files here were accidentally deleted instead of just scraped from just scrape the API keys or whatever you've set up. So if I click rewind, we'll automatically select the correct point in time, and it will be as if the agent never made that mistake. So the data will be back, and what you'll do is you'll take that alert that you've seen where the agent sort of went out of bounds, and instead of a monitoring action, maybe you implement a blocking action next time. But at least now you have a path back as well, right? Because the data happens to be managed by Rubrik, I have this ability to undo that mistake using this remediate action here.
Oh, really cool stuff. We're winding down our conversation. We're almost out of time, but would like to get some closing comments from you on just what's anything exciting that you see coming up on Rubrik's roadmap that we should keep an eye out for. Anything related to what we just spoke about, Rubrik Agent Cloud. What does the year look like for it?
Yeah, I think so. Agent Cloud is, we've just released the version 1 of our product. We just made it generally available a few weeks ago. So early days, super excited. We've been running this with a couple of customers already. So there's work to be done on the platform side for sure, in terms of what are all of the supported, agent builder platforms and so on that you integrate with. That list will be expanded quite rapidly and quite broadly. There's also new ways that people are interacting with agents, right? I already mentioned OpenClaw, for example. Perplexity has just announced their Perplexity Computer, which is a similar concept. So there are these systems that are like workstation systems or offline agents however you want to interpret that we need to control as well. Then there's this idea of using anomaly detection with these agents. So we have a policy system, but what if we, like, over time understand the intent of the agents, because we're seeing all of the agentic operations, and we can start to use or infer from what we've seen what is like expected and unexpected behavior, and we can start to build like dynamic baselines ourselves that we can then use to steer and provide guidance for those agents. So that's something that we're working on and investigating at the moment. And then I think the most asked component is, how do we bring the world of identity and agents closer together? That's going to be a challenge for a lot of organizations going forward, is understanding exactly how these agents operate in terms of how do they authenticate, how do they authorize, what credentials are they using across the entire stack, and sort of tightly bringing that together is something that we're working on and focusing on as well. But in the world of AI and AI agents, like every week there's a new challenge and a new surprise. So that's gonna keep us busy for sure as well.
Yeah, exciting times for sure. But I think, yeah, we got you on the podcast just at the right time, with you guys launching Agent Cloud just recently. And I'm glad you could show us a demo and talk in depth about what's possible with it. And I think, yeah, it's definitely a very interesting offering. And I think for anyone that's running agentic AI at scale with any of these platforms that you mentioned, like Vertex and the others, um, that they should definitely consider something like Rubrik for guardrails on these agents. And you demoed for us so well just how simple it is and what's possible with Agent Cloud and how it works. Yeah, really interesting conversation. Thanks so much for joining us today and explaining all of this to us. It was really insightful.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It's been always happy to come on and share what we've been building. Like I've been doing this for 27 years now, but I wake up excited every day. So it's fun to talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, the excitement definitely shows. And we hope all of our listeners and viewers as well found what we just discussed interesting and helpful. If you're interested, go and check out what Rubrik is up to. Check out the product Rubrik Agent Cloud. Head over to rubrik.com for it. That's Rubrik. And if you want to connect with Philip, do so on LinkedIn. He's Philip, Filip, Verloy, Verloy. And with that, we wrap up this conversation, and we hope you'll join us again for the next episode. We'll see you on that one.